Admittedly, I'm not a huge fan of kaiju films. They are fun, but they're either too B-grade, with men in rubber suits, think the original Tojo films, or too slick and full of CGI fights in the dark, think any of the recent Hollywood films. However, when the opportunity came up to review Kaiju Wars, developed and published by Foolish Mortals, I couldn't say no. Trying to stop giant monsters on a turn-based battlefield was just too good a deal to pass up. Now, Kaiju Wars is not going to stress your modern gaming PC. The art style is certainly retro, with an almost VGA color palette, aiming to look slightly better than 1990s pixel graphics. But that design just adds to the charm. Think of it as a video game equivalent of a man in a rubber suit. Between stages, the suitably cheesy monster story is conveyed via static talking head scenes. Characters are all suitably over the top, with the military commander being particularly memorable. Each chapter is accessed via a panel in a comic book style page, adding to the cheese factor. The stages themselves are presented in a simple board game style. No camera to move around, no zooming in on intricate details, and no complex angles of attack or sightlines to consider, which may be hidden behind terrain or stage features. The camera angle at first seems an odd 3/4 perspective, but that makes sense once you realize you're playing a board game, just with many of the mechanics automated. Each stage starts with a map building out in front of your eyes. A warning alarm can be selected to see where the monster will spawn, usually the ocean, but if it's a tunneling monster, it could also appear from underground. This initial turn allows you to survey the map and to prepare. Sometimes that means building bases, other times the base is already there and you can get straight into building units. That is, if you start with enough cash. Like any good turn-based game, it isn't just about combat, it also requires you manage your resources to win. Resource generation is automated, and at the end of every turn, you generate cash depending on the number of buildings still standing. Losing too many buildings too early to the monster will see that resource generation rate plunge, bringing defeat ever closer. In order to protect your buildings, you need to engage the monster. Some units will focus on damage, some do less damage in exchange for slowing the monster down, while others do only a little bit of both, but they can counter-attack. Luckily, it's not too tough to manage, as the units are not too varied. There's a ground missile attack unit and tanks for ground warfare, and a fast attack jet and slower bomber unit for when you're engaging in the air. In addition to your basic units, some stages will slowly add sci-fi weapons that are insanely powerful, but only spawn after 3 to 5 turns, as opposed to a single turn with your conventional military units. These sci-fi weapons tie into the need to protect buildings, as not only is it key to resource generation, but you also need to protect your science advisor and her laboratories for as long as possible. These labs generate breakthroughs, which are in turn tied to win conditions. Luckily, she can be evacuated and moved to another lab on the map. However, while in transit, no research happens, so building a second lab in an easily accessible part of the map is key and requires careful planning. Battles themselves play out quite simply. Spawn units and send them in. The kaiju will pretty much always attack your units before buildings, and a crucial one-turn delay can make the difference in the endgame. Units must be in an adjacent square, or, for some, no more than 2 away to attack. But generally, adjacent units will be destroyed on the monster's turn, though some might have armor enough to survive a single attack. The monsters aren't one note though. Some can attack non-adjacent units with a tail swipe, while others might tunnel under mountains, enabling them to take shortcuts to your buildings. What is consistent is their wonderful design, though in the opening chapters you may get tired of seeing the same two repeatedly. But they do vary more the more you make your way through the game, so there's no need to panic. The sensation I got the more I played is that Kaiju Wars mechanics are very much based on tabletop games, without that granular control you normally need. Card draws are automated in most stages, such as ones that give moderate stat boosts to monsters, whereas some stages will draw 3 cards for you, the player, forcing you to decide between the option of increased damage for a turn, accelerating research, or maybe requiring some extra resources. This adds a simple yet important risk-reward mechanic to your decision-making. When it comes to longevity, when you beat a level, you can see all the different stage scenarios and potential requirements you need to complete in order to earn all the medals, providing some incentive to replay these stages. On top of that, there's also an online leaderboard that gives you an idea of how efficient you are versus the community. Now, the highest I've ranked is 4th on a stage, winning within 6 turns, while those at the top of the pile generally win within 4 turns, though how is something I simply cannot fathom at the moment. When you're done wrapping up the main campaign, there are also other modes, such as challenge maps, to increase potential game time, and they're not simply lazy afterthoughts. If there's one thing I'd consider a weak element, it's that maps are simple and not procedurally generated. When you face defeat, you load right back into the same map. It makes sense, but repeat plays reduce the challenge, as you quickly figure out the most efficient route to victory. I think the option, maybe in a future patch, to add procedurally generated stages would add some spice to the mix. But overall, Kaiju Wars is a wonderfully fun homage to monster movies, with its tongue firmly in its cheek, that will challenge and delight players in equal measure.